The grit of the desert wind, a constant, abrasive whisper, had become my only companion. It scoured the cracked leather of my boots, settled in the creases of my face, and seemed to carry the ghosts of every mistake I'd ever made. Years had bled into each other out here, a monotonous smear of sun-baked earth and endless sky. I'd traded the city's clamor for this desolate quiet, a penance of sorts, though I doubted the universe kept score. My name is Cole, and I was a man who'd once chased shadows, only to find they'd chased me right back. My current occupation involved keeping the peace in a town that barely registered on any map, a collection of sun-bleached buildings clinging to the edge of nowhere. It wasn't the badge I'd once worn, not by a long shot, but it was a living. Mostly, it meant mediating disputes over stray dogs and leaky water pipes. The adrenaline had long since leached out of my veins, replaced by a dull ache that settled deep in my bones. Then the call came, a tremor in the otherwise placid surface of my existence. The voice on the other end, raspy with a fatigue I recognized intimately, belonged to a former colleague. He didn't waste pleasantries. "Cole, we've got something strange down by the old industrial sector." The industrial sector, a ghost town of rusting metal and shattered glass, a monument to forgotten ambition. It was the kind of place where secrets went to die, or sometimes to be born. I drove my beat-up truck, the engine groaning in protest, the landscape a familiar, unyielding canvas. The air grew thick with the metallic tang of decay as I approached the perimeter. The scene was cordoned off, flashing blue and red lights painting stark, jarring strokes against the twilight. Uniformed figures moved with a practiced urgency, their faces grim. I ducked under the tape, a ghost myself in this familiar theater of crime. The colleague met me, his eyes, usually sharp, were clouded with a disquiet I hadn't seen since. "Well, since him, what is it?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. "The old freight tunnel, the one that runs under the ridge, it's been repurposed." I walked towards it, the sand crunching underfoot. The entrance was a jagged scar reinforced with rotting timbers. This was it, the tunnel entrance, desert side. A place I'd scoured for clues, a place that had yielded nothing but dead ends and despair. Repurposed how? I prompted, my gaze sweeping over the scene. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, no discarded tools, no hurried footprints, just stillness, an unnerving, profound stillness. "They hit the downtown vault," the colleague said, his voice low. "Clean, no alarms tripped, no witnesses. They bypassed the seismic sensors, the thermal imaging. It was like they walked through walls." He paused, then added, his words heavy with unspoken meaning, "And the way they did it, Cole, it's the same." My breath hitched. "The same." The word hung in the air, a phantom limb of memory. We descended into the tunnel. The sand underfoot was undisturbed, save for a faint shimmer that caught the light. I knelt, my fingers tracing the pattern. It was fine, almost powdery, unlike the coarser sand outside. "What is this?" I murmured, rubbing it between my thumb and forefinger. It felt unnervingly smooth. The colleague pointed his own light further down the tunnel. "They used this to cover their tracks like dust, but it's not sand. Forensics are baffled." I stood, my gaze fixed on the shimmering trail, baffled. That was a familiar state for the authorities. I remembered the reports, the endless theories, the frustration that had gnawed at my own resolve. This killer, whoever they were, possessed a mind that operated on a different plane, a mind that mirrored the one I had failed to apprehend. We reached the end of the accessible section. A thick, reinforced steel door blocked further passage. It was pristine, unmarked. "They didn't breach this," the colleague stated, his voice laced with disbelief. "They just—" No scratches, no signs of welding or cutting. It was as if they had simply phased through it. This wasn't just a heist. This was a performance, a taunt. As we emerged back into the fading light, the colleague turned to me, his expression a mixture of desperation and reluctant hope. "The Mo, Cole, it's identical. The precision, the vanishing act, it's him or someone who studied him. We're out of our depth." It was a blueprint, and the architect of my ruin was back, leaving his signature in the dust. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a message, and I was the only one who could decipher it. My disillusionment, for the first time in years, felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. The ghost had returned, and this time I wouldn't let it walk away. The wind, a constant companion in this desolate expanse, whipped sand against my face as I stood at the tunnel entrance, desert side. It was a gaping maw, a dark invitation into the earth, and the same one that had swallowed a life I couldn't save. The air here tasted of grit and regret. Years had passed, but the stench of that night clung to me, a phantom residue I could never quite scrub away. Now it seemed the architect of that ruin had decided to revisit his masterpiece. My knuckles were white where I gripped the rough stone, the texture familiar, almost comforting in its harsh reality. The official channels, they'd done their dance. The uniform, a gruff man with eyes that had seen too much and cared too little, had given me the cursory rundown. Another heist, clean, efficient, and utterly baffling to them, but I knew. I felt it in the marrow of my bones, a cold, sharp certainty that cut through the desert haze. The precision, the calculated audacity, it was a language I understood, a dialect of violence spoken by a ghost. I'd walked away from the badge, from the relentless pursuit of justice that had consumed me. The desert had been my penance, a vast, empty canvas for my shattered peace. But this was a summons, not while I could still breathe. My gaze swept across the surrounding scrubland. The ground was hard-baked, cracked like old leather. A few hardy mesquite bushes clung to life, their thorny branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The heist had been at the old industrial depot on the outskirts of town, a place I knew intimately from a different lifetime. I turned my back on the tunnel entrance, the wind tugging at my jacket, urging me forward. My car, a beat-up sedan that had seen better days, was parked a discreet distance away, a relic of a life I'd tried to outrun. Sliding into the driver's seat, the worn leather cool against my skin, I started the engine. The rumble was a familiar comfort, a promise of movement, of progress. The drive to the depot was a silent meditation. My mind replayed the details the uniform had provided, piecing together fragments of information that gnawed at me. They'd bypassed advanced security systems with unnerving ease. No forced entry, no alarms tripped. It was as if the vault had simply opened its mouth and swallowed the contents whole. The stolen goods, not just cash or jewels, specific high-value components, the kind that could be repurposed for things best left unsaid. As I approached the depot, the stark silhouette of the buildings rose against the bruised twilight sky. Floodlights, the harsh glare of officialdom, cut through the gloom, illuminating the scene. I slipped past the yellow tape, a familiar transgression. Detective on site, a younger man with a meticulously neat uniform and an air of weary competence, noticed me. His eyes, sharp and observant, flickered with recognition, then annoyance. "Cole," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing here? This is a crime scene." I met his gaze, my own steady. "I heard about the heist, thought I might offer a different perspective." He scoffed, a small, humorless sound. "Your perspective? Last I checked, you were retired, enjoying the tranquility." He gestured vaguely towards the desert. "Tranquility can be overrated," I replied, my eyes scanning the scene. The air here was thick with the metallic tang of disturbed dust and something else, something faint and almost floral. It was out of place, like a misplaced bloom in a graveyard. I'd smelled it before, years ago. "Look, Cole," the detective said, stepping closer, his voice dropping. "We appreciate your history, but this isn't your case anymore. We've got it handled." "Handled?" I echoed, my gaze fixed on a scuff mark near the main vault door. It was too clean, too deliberate, not the mark of a hurried escape. Looks like it was handled by someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who knew the blind spots, the vulnerabilities, someone who maybe left a calling card. He frowned, his eyes following my gaze. "A calling card? We didn't find anything." "Not everything is found by looking," I said, my voice low. I knelt, my fingers tracing the faint outline of the scuff. It was a peculiar pattern, almost like a stylized swirl. I'd seen it before, etched into the back of a discarded cigarette pack, a fleeting signature I dismissed as a doodle. The detective watched me, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps, or a grudging respect. "What are you thinking, Cole?" I stood up, brushing the dust from my hands. "I'm thinking this isn't just a heist, this is a message, and I think I know who's sending it." The faint floral scent seemed to intensify, a ghostly perfume in the sterile air. It was the same scent that had wafted from the victim's apartment all those years ago, a detail I'd never been able to place, a detail that had haunted my waking hours. Now it was a beacon. "You're chasing ghosts, Cole," the detective said, his tone softening slightly. "Maybe," I conceded, grim smile touching my lips. "But sometimes the ghosts are the ones who know the way." I turned, the desert wind at my back. My own investigation had just begun. The desert air, usually a dry, abrasive caress, felt thick and suffocating. It clung to me, a second skin woven from grit and the phantom scent of lilies. I stood at the mouth of the tunnel entrance, desert side, the raw black moor gaping before me like a wound in the earth. The silence here was a heavy blanket, broken only by the whisper of wind skittering across loose stones. The previous night's events replayed in my mind, a broken film reel, the overturned display cases, the shattered glass catching the harsh glare of my flashlight like 1,000 tiny, accusing eyes. The stolen jewels, glittering like fallen stars, were gone, but it was the meticulousness that gnawed at me. The clean lines of the forced entry, the way the alarms had been bypassed with surgical precision. It was a dance I knew too well, a macabre ballet performed by a ghost from my past. The floral scent, faint but persistent, had been the thread that pulled me back. Lilies, the same lilies that had perfumed the air in the apartment of the first victim years ago, the killer I never caught, the killer I swore I would. A gruff voice shattered the stillness. "Cole, what the hell are you doing out here?" I turned. A detective, his uniform rumpled from a long night, stood a few yards away, his face etched with suspicion. He held a half-eaten donut in one hand, the other resting on the butt of his service weapon. "Just thinking," I answered, my voice rough. The desert sun was beginning its ascent, painting the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange. "Thinking about what? This mess?" He gestured vaguely towards the abandoned warehouse, a skeletal silhouette against the dawn. "This is the third one, Cole. Third time someone's hit a high-end jewelry outfit like they're picking flowers, and the third time you've shown up before the cavalry." He wasn't wrong. I'd been drawn to the scene of the first two heists, a moth to a flame, compelled by a force I couldn't explain, a gnawing certainty that this was more than just petty crime. "It's the precision," I responded, walking back towards the warehouse, the detective trailing behind me. No wasted movement. No unnecessary damage. They knew exactly what they were after, and they knew how to get it without leaving a trace. Almost, the detective snorted. "They left plenty of trace. Broken glass, empty velvet cushions. What are you seeing that we aren't?" I stopped, my gaze sweeping over the scene. The meticulous placement of the overturned display cases, the way the security cameras had been disabled. It was too clean, too deliberate. "The scent," I added, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. "Did anyone else notice it?" He frowned, chewing thoughtfully. "Scent? What scent?" "Lilies," I replied, the word tasting bitter, faint like perfume. The detective's eyes narrowed. He took a slow bite of his donut, his gaze fixed on me. "You've been watching too many old movies, Cole. This is a professional job. Professional thieves don't leave perfume samples." He was right, of course. It was absurd. But the scent had been there. Undeniable. A whisper from the past, a phantom echo in the present. Suddenly, a distant siren wailed, growing louder. More official vehicles, their flashing lights painting the dusty landscape in strobes of red and blue, were approaching. The detective sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Looks like the brass wants a piece of the action. They'll want to know why you're here, Cole, again." My gut tightened. The disgraced detective, the unsolved case. It was a narrative that preceded me. A scarlet letter stitched onto my soul. What if the killer wasn't just sending a message? What if they were sending a message to me? What if they knew I was watching? The stakes, already high, suddenly felt impossibly so. The lilies, I realized with a sickening lurch, were not just a scent. They were a signature. And the artist was back. The air at the tunnel entrance, desert side, tasted like grit and regret. Dust devils danced a slow, marking waltz across the cracked earth, mirroring the disquiet churning in my gut. The flashing blues and reds of the responding units painted the barren landscape in jarring streaks, a garish announcement of another intrusion. They'd found something. Of course, they'd found something. I ducked under the yellow tape, the plastic snagging on my worn leather jacket. A uniformed officer, his face a mask of weary efficiency, nodded me through. He knew me, or rather, he knew the ghost of me. The detective who used to walk these streets with a purpose, now dulled by years of unanswered questions. The cavernous maw of the tunnel swallowed the sunlight, plunging the immediate area into a premature twilight. The scent of damp earth and something metallic, coppery and sharp, prickled my nostrils. This wasn't just a break-in, it was a statement. The precision, the sheer audacity of it, screamed of a familiar hand. A colleague, his brow furrowed in concentration, was meticulously examining a section of the reinforced concrete wall. He looked up as I approached, his eyes scanning me with a mixture of appraisal and something akin to pity. "Cole, didn't expect to see you out here." His voice was low, rough around the edges like a poorly cut stone. "Heard there was a disturbance," I answered, my gaze sweeping over the scene. The debris was minimal, suggesting a clean, swift operation. No forced entry, no shattered glass. Just an emptiness where something valuable should have been. "Disturbance is putting it mildly," the colleague grunted, gesturing with a gloved hand. "Whoever did this bypassed every security measure like they were made of tissue paper. Vaults empty, clean as a whistle. Not a fingerprint, not a scuff mark out of place." I knelt, my knees protesting the movement. The floor was surprisingly clean, save for a scattering of fine, dark grit. I'd seen this grit before, years ago, in the shadowed corners of a crime scene that had become my personal purgatory. "What was taken?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's the kicker," the colleague said, his gaze fixed on the vault's massive, now gaping door. "Not the gold, not the jewels. They took the historical archives, the old city records, birth certificates, property deeds, census data, stuff nobody's looked at in 50 years. My breath hitched. This was more than greed. This was symbolic, the archives, the forgotten history of this city. "Why?" I stood, my gaze drifting to the far end of the tunnel where it faded into impenetrable blackness. "The Ripper. Anything else?" I pressed, my mind racing, piecing together fragments of a forgotten puzzle. The colleague hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, tarnished silver locket. "Found this tucked behind a loose brick near the vault. Thought it was odd. Doesn't look like it belongs to any of the staff." I took the locket, my fingers tracing its intricate floral engraving. The clasp was stiff, but with a gentle prod it sprang open. Inside, 2 faded photographs stared back at me. A woman, her eyes sharp and intelligent, and a child no older than 5 with a mischievous grin. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot through me. The woman's eyes. I knew those eyes. They belonged to a victim, one of the Rippers. He was found in a dusty, forgotten warehouse on the docks. Her story cut short before it could fully unfold. "What is it?" the colleague asked, seeing the sudden tension in my posture. "Nothing," I lied, snapping the locket shut. "Just a reminder of who we're dealing with." But it was far from nothing. It was a thread, thin and almost invisible, but it was a thread nonetheless. A thread that led from this desolate desert tunnel through the silent vaults of forgotten history and back to the ghosts I tried so desperately to bury. This wasn't just a series of heists, and the audience, it seemed, was me. The Ripper was back, and he was playing a game I understood all too well. The tension in the air was no longer just the desert heat, it was the palpable thrum of a predator stirring from a long, calculated slumber. And I, the disgraced detective, was his unwilling antagonist. The locket lay open in my hand, a tiny sarcophagus for ghosts. The woman's gaze, even faded, held a defiant spark. The child's smile, a fragile bloom against the sepia tones, twisted something in my gut. This wasn't just a memento, it was a breadcrumb, a deliberate offering, but to whom and why now? The scent of stale dust and something metallic, coppery, clung to the air, a familiar perfume of the forgotten. I closed the locket, the click echoing in the cavernous quiet of my makeshift office. The office was a repurposed shipping container, its corrugated walls a brutalist testament to my current standing. Outside, the desert wind whispered its secrets, a relentless dry rasp. The photographs were a puzzle piece I hadn't known was missing, a chilling echo of the Ripper's meticulous artistry. He'd always left a signature, a macabre calling card. But this felt different, more personal. My fingers tightened around the locket. The photographs were too clear, too pristine for something that had been lost. This was a message, a challenge. My eyes drifted to the wall, where the Ripper's victims were pinned, faded newspaper clippings, police reports dog-eared and worn. Each one a testament to my failure, each one a phantom I carried. The phone, a relic of a more connected life, rang, its shrill cry an unwelcome intrusion. I snatched it up, my voice a low growl. "Cole, I have it," a voice rasped like sandpaper on dry bone. It was the voice from the encrypted call, one that had sent me scrambling to that abandoned warehouse. What do I want? I kept my own voice level, a dangerous calm settling over me. "Information, the locket, it's yours now, isn't it?" A dry chuckle followed, a sound devoid of mirth. "He's making a statement, Cole, not just about the past, about I. Who is he?" My gaze swept over the Ripper's wall. Had he returned, or was this a new player using the old playbook? The methods are the same, yes. The precision, the theatricality, but the target is different. I read looking in the wrong place, Cole. He's not looking back, he's looking forward, and he's building something. Building what? A monument, the voice hissed, to my failure to his success. The line went dead. The dial tone buzzed, a digital mockery of the conversation. A monument to my failure. The words echoed, each syllable a blow. He knew. He knew about the weight I carried, the phantom limb of guilt. I grabbed my jacket, the worn leather a second skin. The locket felt warm now, as if absorbing the heat of my anger. The Ripper's methods, yes, but twisted, amplified. The heists were bolder, the targets more audacious. They weren't random acts of violence, they were carefully orchestrated performances. My gut churned. This wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself I'd buried deep. A remote location, far from the city's grimy embrace. The tunnel entrance, desert side. A place where secrets went to die or to be reborn. The desert air was thick with the scent of creosote and distant rain that never seemed to fall. I moved with a hunter's grace, my footsteps crunching softly on the gravel. This was it. The confrontation, a flicker of movement. A shape detached itself from the deeper gloom. Not one man, two. The first stepped into the faint moonlight, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. The voice from the phone. "I led me here," I stated, my hand resting on the reassuring weight of the pistol concealed beneath my jacket. "A necessary step," he conceded. The second man shifted, and for a fleeting moment the moonlight caught a glint of metal. A tool, a weapon, that I was never close, the man in the hat said, his voice laced with a cruel amusement, that I saw only the surface. "He's been watching, waiting, finish what?" "My career," the man in the hat said, a slow smile spreading across his face, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally in the dim light. "My life." Suddenly the hulking figure moved, not with speed but with a deliberate, relentless force. He lunged not at me but at the man in the hat. Then a sharp crack, a sickening thud. The hulking figure crumpled to the ground. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a sudden horror. He wasn't supposed to. Before he could finish, a silent projectile sliced through the air, striking him in the throat. He choked, his hands flying to his neck, his eyes pleading, unseeing. He collapsed beside his attacker. Tall, lean, his movements unnervingly fluid. He held a long, slender implement, its tip glinting. The Ripper. He didn't speak. He simply looked at me, his gaze piercing, intelligent, and utterly devoid of emotion. He gestured to the fallen men, then to the locket in my pocket. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a warning. And I had walked right into his trap. I had been played. The Ripper wasn't just back. He was operating on a level I hadn't even conceived of, and I was no closer to stopping him than I had been 20 years ago. The desert wind howled, a mournful dirge for my shattered certainty. The desert wind, a dry rasp against my skin, whipped grit into my eyes as I stumbled from the tunnel entrance, desert side. The acrid tang of cordite still clung to the air, a phantom scent that had been my constant companion for weeks. He was gone, a wraith in the gloom, had vanished as if swallowed by the earth itself. All that remained was the still, cooling form of the informant, a silent testament to a truth I was desperate to unearth. My fingers, raw and trembling, fumbled with the small, tarnished locket I'd pried from the informant's clenched fist. It was all I had, a single, fragile thread in a tapestry of deception that had ensnared me for years. I'd followed it here, to this desolate stretch of sand, hoping for answers, for a confession, for anything to finally break the suffocating silence of my failure. Instead, I found another death, another ghost added to the ledger of my past. Back in my cramped, makeshift office, a disused shipping container overlooking the docks, smelling perpetually of brine and despair, I laid the locket on the scarred surface of my desk. The weak, flickering bulb overhead cast dancing shadows, making the intricate engraving seem to writhe. It was a raven, its wings spread in flight, a single, impossibly tiny emerald glinting in its eye. Familiar, terribly familiar. I'd seen this symbol before, years ago, scrawled on a cryptic note left at the scene of the first victim, a signature perhaps, or a taunt. At the time, I'd dismissed it as the ramblings of a deranged mind, a fleeting detail lost in the whirlwind of a case that had ultimately consumed me. The heists, the precision, the utter lack of witnesses, the clean disappearances. They weren't just echoes of the killer's methods. They were the killer's methods, honed and perfected, but why? I ran a hand over my stubbled chin, the rough texture a mirror of the gnawing anxiety in my gut, or at least a fragment of one. Serafina. It had been barely audible, lost in the rustle of his dying breath. I dismissed it then, a fevered delusion. But the locket, the raven, it was a connection undeniable. I pulled out the old case files, the brittle paper crackling under my touch. I'd been through them 100 times, each pore in the paper a testament to my obsession. But this time, I wasn't looking for the killer's MO. Hours bled into one another. The only sound was the rhythmic creak of the container in the wind and the frantic rustle of paper. I found it buried deep within a witness statement, a passing mention from a frightened shopkeeper who'd seen a woman lurking near one of the earlier crime scenes. My breath hitched. The informant's last words, Serafina, the locket, a raven, the witness description. This wasn't just about stolen goods. This was personal. The heists were a means to an end, a way to draw me out, to force my hand. I remembered another detail from the old case, something I'd buried deep, a nagging inconsistency that had always bothered me. One of the victims, a reclusive art collector, had been found with a single, perfectly preserved raven feather clutched in his hand. I dismissed it as a macabre flourish. Now it felt like a breadcrumb, a deliberate trail laid out for me. The killer wasn't just mirroring the past, they were reliving it. And they were doing it with me as the intended audience. But why me? Why now? My gaze fell upon a photograph tucked into the case file, a grainy image of the crime scene from years ago. The victim, a renowned historian, lay sprawled on his study floor, and in the background, almost out of focus, something caught my eye. It was a silhouette, a fleeting impression of a figure standing in the corner watching. A figure that, even in its blurred indistinctness, possessed a certain grace. They all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The killer wasn't a stranger. They were someone I'd overlooked, someone I'd failed to see, someone who had been there all along. And the motive wasn't a simple thirst for chaos. It was vengeance, my vengeance. I looked at the locket again, tracing the outline of the raven with my fingertip. The emerald eye seemed to gleam with a knowing malice. This wasn't just a series of heists, and the final act was about to begin. The tunnel entrance, desert side, spat me out into a world bleached by the relentless sun. Sand, fine as powdered bone, swirled around my boots, a constant, gritty reminder of the desert's indifference. The acrid scent of cordite, a ghost of the recent struggle, clung to my clothes, to my very skin. He was gone, a blur of calculated motion in the suffocating dark, had melted away, leaving behind only the echo of his footsteps and a gnawing emptiness in my gut. I ran a hand over my face, the grit of familiar, unwelcome texture. My eyes burned, not just from the wind, but from a deeper, more primal exhaustion. This wasn't just another case. This was the echo of a failure, a specter I'd tried to outrun for a decade. The same meticulous planning, the same chilling precision, the same utter disregard for consequence. It was him. It had to be him, but how? How could he be back, orchestrating these elaborate charades with such terrifying familiarity? My breath hitched. The stolen artifact, the one that had led me to this god-forsaken hole in the earth, was gone. Not just gone, but taken. The thief hadn't just escaped. He'd plucked it from my grasp with a flourish that marked my every move. It was a personal insult, a gauntlet thrown down. But the real sting, the one that twisted my gut into a knot of ice, came when I saw the note. Tucked beneath a loose rock near where the figure had stood, a folded piece of paper, stark white against the ochre dust. My heart, a drum I'd long since learned to ignore, began a frantic, uneven rhythm. My fingers, clumsy with haste, fumbled with the edge. The paper was thick, expensive, not the kind of thing a desert hermit would leave. The scroll was deliberate, almost elegant, a stark contrast to the brutality of his actions. It wasn't a threat, not in the conventional sense. It was a statement, a declaration. The first pawn has been moved, it read. The words hung in the dry air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Pawn, who was the pawn, and what game was this? My mind raced, sifting through the faces, the names, the memories that had haunted my waking hours and stalked my dreams. The past case, the one that had broken me, the one where the victims had been chess pieces. I scanned the surrounding dunes, the vast, empty expanse offering no solace, no answers, just the endless ripple of sand under the indifferent sky. Back in the cramped, dusty office I'd commandeered, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and desperation, I spread out the meager evidence. The retrieved security footage from the previous heist, grainy and unreliable, offered only fleeting glimpses of the perpetrator. But this time, something was different. The note, the deliberate wording, this wasn't just about stolen goods anymore. This was about leverage, about forcing my hand. He knew me. He knew what I was looking for, and he was playing with me. A colleague, a sharp-eyed woman with a weariness that mirrored my own, entered. Her footsteps soft on the worn floorboards. She carried a file, its cover stamped with official seals. "Anything?" I asked, my voice raspy. She shook her head, her gaze flicking to the note spread on my desk. "The artifact is gone, vanished, no trace, and the tunnel, it was a dead end, just as we suspected." She paused, her brow furrowed. "But there's something else, something odd." She slid the file across the desk. Inside, a photograph. It was of a small, nondescript building. A warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place I'd dismissed as irrelevant in the initial investigation. The one who disappeared without a trace, the one I never found. My breath caught in my throat. The first victim, the one whose absence had been the catalyst for everything, the unsolved wound that had festered for years. He was directly connecting these new crimes to the old. To my old. Why now? I muttered, more to myself than to her. Why bring that back now? The colleague hesitated, her eyes fixed on my face. "Cole, this isn't just about the heists anymore, is it?" I looked at the photograph at the anonymous warehouse, a pawn, and if the first victim's sharp was significant, what did that make the next move? A knot of unease tightened in my chest. He wasn't just taunting me, he was escalating. He was drawing me deeper into his twisted game, and the stakes were no longer abstract. They were personal. They were about the ghosts I carried. The chill of the desert night seeped through my threadbare coat, a familiar companion on nights like these. The air, usually thick with the scent of creosote and dry earth, now carried a metallic tang, a subtle undercurrent that set my teeth on edge. I stood at the tunnel entrance, desert side, the gaping maw of darkness swallowing the faint moonlight. The photograph of the anonymous warehouse still burned in my mind. A pawn. He was drawing me deeper into his twisted game, and the stakes were everything. My past failures, the faces I couldn't save, they were all here with me, ghosts in the wind. They'll be moving it, the artifact, the one from the gallery. The gallery, another meticulously chosen target, not for its monetary value, but for its symbolic weight. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about legacy. It was about proving he was still the architect of fear, the maestro of mayhem. My gaze swept across the desolate landscape. Every rustle of wind through the sparse scrub brush sounded like a footstep, every distant coyote howl a warning. I was alone as I preferred it. The fewer people involved, the fewer potential casualties when the inevitable storm broke. The informant's tip was the final piece, the bait that had finally lured him into the open. But bait could also be a trap, and I had to be sure I wasn't the one caught in its jaws. My mind replayed the details of the original cases, the ones that had broken me. The precise, almost surgical nature of the crimes, the lack of forced entry. He'd always been meticulous, a phantom who left no fingerprints, no witnesses, only a signature so subtle it was almost missed. And now he was back, or someone was wearing his mask. But there was a new boldness, a theatrical flair that hadn't been present before. The warehouse, the gallery, these weren't random choices, they were statements. I pulled out my burner phone, the screen casting a pale glow on my face. A single text message sent an hour ago, ETA 0200, North Entrance, be ready. The informant's coded language. He wasn't directly involved, just a conduit, a necessary evil in this dirty business. A flicker of movement in the periphery. My hand instinctively went to my weapon. I flattened myself against the rough, cool rock face, my senses on high alert. Nothing. Just the wind playing its tricks again, or was it? My heart, despite my efforts to remain calm, gave a little lurch. I had to anticipate him, not just react. If he was recreating his past, what was his ultimate goal? What was the crescendo? The informant had mentioned an artifact from the gallery. That was new. The original crimes had focused on a different kind of extraction. Something personal, something that fed a deeper hunger. My breath plumed in front of me. I waited, a statue carved from patience and regret. He would come. He had to. The allure of his own legend, the need to prove his continued mastery, would be his undoing or mine. A low rumble, barely perceptible at first, vibrated through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the wind. It was mechanical. A vehicle. Approaching the tunnel entrance, desert side, I drew my weapon, the metal smooth and cool against my palm. A truck. Old, utilitarian, its headlights off. It moved with a practiced stealth that spoke of familiarity with this desolate terrain. This was it. The trap was set. Now I just had to see if the prey would walk into it. I took a deep, steadying breath and stepped out from behind the rock. The game was on. The air in the abandoned warehouse hung thick with the scent of stale oil and something metallic, a ghost of rust clinging to my throat. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight piercing the grimy windows, each a tiny spotlight on the desolation. This was it, the breadcrumb trail finally leading me to a place that felt as hollow as my own chest. The recent string of robberies, each one a precise echo of the past, had led me here. The gallery, that last, taunting masterpiece of chaos, had been the final clue. It wasn't just about the stolen artifacts, it was about the narrative, the twisted story being rewritten with every strike. My boots crunched on shattered glass as I moved deeper into the cavernous space. The silence was a heavy blanket, muffling the distant hum of the city. I remembered the first time I'd walked into a scene like this, years ago, a green detective with fire in my gut. Now, the fire was a banked ember, a low burn of regret and a desperate need for redemption. The perpetrator, whoever they were, was playing a game of memory, forcing me to revisit every mistake, every missed opportunity. A faint light flickered at the far end of the warehouse, near a hulking, silent machine I couldn't quite identify in the gloom. It pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, like a wounded heart. I flattened myself against a stack of decaying crates, my senses straining. The metallic tang in the air was stronger here, sharper. It wasn't just rust, it was the coppery scent of fresh blood. My breath hitched. Then I heard it, a low, guttural murmur, a voice I recognized with a sickening lurch. It was the voice from the intercepted communications, the one I'd dismissed as a red herring, a phantom echo of the past. But it was real, and it was here. I edged closer, my hand instinctively going to the worn grip of my sidearm. The light emanated from a single bare bulb dangling precariously, illuminating a scene that froze me. A figure stood hunched over a workbench, their back to me. The metallic glint wasn't from the machine, it was from a series of surgical instruments laid out with unnerving precision. And on the workbench, nestled amongst them, was an item I recognized with a jolt that sent tremors through my body. The serpent's eye. The centerpiece of the stolen collection from the city museum. The one that had officially closed the books on the serial killer case, the one I'd been told was long gone. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a copycat. This was him, or someone who knew him intimately. The meticulous planning, the symbolic targets, the very signature of the crimes, it was all here laid bare. But what was he doing with the serpent's eye? The figure stirred. They turned slowly, and the dim light caught their face. It was the stranger I'd seen at the gallery, one with the unnervingly calm demeanor. But his eyes, now glinting in the harsh light, held a manic intensity that was terrifyingly familiar. "Cole," he said, his voice smooth, almost conversational, yet laced with an edge of triumph. "I knew you'd find me eventually. You always do, don't you? A moth to a flame." My muscles tensed. "You killed them," I stated, the words a rough growl, "all of them. This isn't just about theft." He chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Theft, my dear Cole, this is about art, about legacy, about finally completing my masterpiece." He gestured to the serpent's eye. This little bauble was merely the opening act, the canvas for my true work. My gaze swept over the instruments, the blood. "What work?" "The unveiling," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The grand finale, the culmination of years of preparation." He picked up a scalpel, its edge gleaming. "You see, the pattern wasn't just a signature. It was a blueprint, a path laid out for me, guiding me to this very moment. This wasn't just about catching a criminal, it was about stopping a ritual, the cryptic message. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic. He wasn't just recreating the past, he was building towards something new, something monstrous. "You're insane," I managed, my voice tight. "Perhaps. But then, aren't all artists a little mad? And my art is destined to be immortal." He took a step towards me, the scalpel held loosely in his hand. "But first, we must address the loose end, the persistent detective who refuses to let go." The air crackled with unspoken threat. I knew with absolute certainty that this was the precipice. Everything I had lost, everything I had failed to protect, hinged on this moment. The detective I was meant to be, the one who could have stopped him years ago, was finally here. And he was me. My hand tightened on my weapon. The low hum of the mysterious machine seemed to intensify, a silent countdown. This was it, the end of the line, the climax of a story I never wanted to write, but was now forced to finish. He lunged. not with the ferocity of a cornered animal, but with the calculated grace of a predator. I reacted, the years of instinct kicking in, a desperate ballet of evasion and counterattack. The metallic clang of steel against steel echoed in the vast space as I deflected his first strike. His eyes, burning with an unnatural fire, locked onto mine. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a battle for my soul. The past was no longer a ghost. It was a tangible, breathing entity demanding its reckoning, and I, Cole, was its unwilling executioner. Suddenly, a guttural roar ripped through the warehouse, not from my lips, but from the stranger himself. He spun, focus shifting from me to the machine. It was overloading, sparks spitting from its core, the humming reaching a deafening crescendo. He screamed, a sound of pure agony and rage, as a blinding flash of light erupted from the device, engulfing him. When my vision cleared, the figure was gone. Only the serpent's eye remained, glinting innocently on the workbench. The smell of ozone now mingled with the metallic tang of blood. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling like lead. He was gone. Vanished, but the blood was real, and the serpent's eye. It wasn't just a stolen artifact anymore. It was a testament to a confrontation that had ripped through the fabric of my reality. I looked at my hands, trembling slightly, the phantom weight of the scalpel still on my palm. Had I truly just faced him, or had I faced myself? The gritty dust of the tunnel entrance, desert side, settled on my boots like a shroud. It coated everything, the cracked earth, the skeletal remains of scrub brush, the very air I inhaled. The silence that followed the cacophony was a heavy blanket, muffling the frantic pulse that still thrummed beneath my skin. I watched the figures being led away, their faces a mixture of defiance and defeat, their meticulously crafted plan unraveled thread by thread. The stranger, the architect of this elaborate charade, was gone, vanished into the labyrinthine tunnels like a phantom, leaving behind only the echo of his chillingly precise methods. He had been so close, so terrifyingly close to achieving his end game, a twisted symphony of calculated chaos. But he hadn't accounted for the desperation that gnawed at me, the primal urge to finally put the ghosts to rest. A colleague approached, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own. He held out a small, tarnished silver locket. "We found this," he responded, his voice rough, near where the stranger disappeared. My fingers trembled as I took it. The metal was cool against my skin, the intricate engraving worn smooth by time and touch. I flipped it open. Inside, two faded photographs stared back at me, a woman with kind eyes and a child with a mischievous grin. A knot tightened in my chest. This was it, not greed, not power, but a grief so profound it had festered into something monstrous. "We've got units sweeping, but..." He trailed off, the unspoken difficulty hanging heavy between us. The tunnels were a death trap, a maze designed for one purpose, to disappear. I looked at the locket, at the faces frozen in time, and a profound sadness washed over me. It wasn't just about catching the criminal anymore. It was about understanding the brokenness that drove him. It was about acknowledging the lives he had shattered, the potential he had extinguished, and the profound loss that had twisted him into this shape. My own past, a tangled web of regret and unfinished business, felt a little less suffocating. The faces of the victims, the ones I had failed to save, swam before my eyes, and in doing so, it had also illuminated a path forward. I handed the locket back to the colleague. "Let them have him," I added, my voice surprisingly steady. "The tunnels will do their work. He made his choices." He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "And you, Cole, what about you?" I looked out at the vast, indifferent desert, the sun beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and bruised purple. The weight I had carried for so long felt lighter, though not entirely gone. It was a scar, a permanent reminder of the cost of failure, but no longer a crippling burden. "I'm going home," I replied, the words tasting strange and sweet on my tongue. Home. A concept I had almost forgotten. A place where the ghosts might finally find some peace, and where I might, just might, find mine too. I turned my back on the tunnel entrance, on the lingering scent of dust and despair, and walked towards the waiting vehicle. The desert stretched before me, a canvas of endless possibility. The road ahead was uncertain, the path to redemption long and winding, but for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of hope. That in itself was a kind of resolution. The case was closed, the immediate threat neutralized, but the true resolution, the one that mattered most, was only just beginning.